Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. I know it's difficult to get started on time, but we'll get in our groove on this early morning shift. Welcome everybody this morning, and as you know, this morning we are going to continue on with our study dealing with potential agreements with the Canadian Pacific Alliance. We're going to have two different panels this morning. We're going to go with the first panel will go probably till 10, and then the second panel will start after that, and we'll go to 11:15. So without further ado, we have with us this morning two witnesses. We really appreciate you coming. We got the Canadian Labour Congress, and we got the St. John Port Authority. Folks, and I think you came before us before, and we appreciate you coming back to our committee. We'd like if the presentations can be under 5 minutes, and then we can have good dialogue with the MPs, and that would go well. We also had St. John Port Authority is through video conference. Mr. Dixon, welcome. Can you hear us all right? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
So maybe I think, because we always try to get the video conference going first in case we have any hiccups. So since you're on deck and you're there, are you good to go, sir?
I'm good to go. Anytime you like.
Can everybody hear Mr. Dixon all right? I don't know if you need to get a little closer or something, but we don't seem to be able to hear you very well.
Let's run a test. How does this sound? Can everybody hear now?
Yeah, can everybody hear okay? Okay, Mr. Dixon, you got the floor, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to appear before the committee, at least through technology. I mean,
excuse me, sir, we're losing you. We're losing you. I don't know if you hear us. We lost you again. It might be on our side. So, you want to try it again? Oh. No, we have nothing. Can you raise your hand if you can hear me? No, he can't hear us either. Just okay. Where do we go from here? Does he know? Okay. Can you hear me, sir? Well, we got bad technology.
Okay, so maybe we can go with.
I think we have to. I think we'll have to hold there for a minute. Can you put me on so he can see me? Maybe. Okay. We are going to go to another. Okay, maybe.
Write a sign.
Maybe we can have the Canadian Labour Congress go ahead, and maybe we can. Maybe you guys can figure out what's their problem in the meantime. Does he have a technician with him?
The technicians are taking care of that.
It is, right? No point going.
You hear us all right, sir? Can you put your hand up if you hear us? Okay. We cannot hear you, so we're going to have to hold for a minute, and we're going to go to another witness. You understand? Okay. Okay. So, we'll go to the Canadian Labour Congress. Welcome, folks, and you got the floor.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. On behalf of the Canadian Labour Congress and its 3.3 million members, we thank you for affording us the opportunity to present our views here today. As you know, the CLC bring together, of course, national, international unions along with provincial and territorial federations of labor, labor councils across the country, working in every sector in our economy and, of course, in all occupations in all parts of our country. Today we appear to explain why we believe that any free trade agreement between Canada and the Pacific Alliance, Peru, Colombia, Chile, and Mexico should have people's well-being and workers' rights at its core. The old model of free trade agreement prioritized corporate rights over workers and the environment. We believe this contributes to the global instability through inequalities of wealth and income, deregulation of the financial service, and of course the removals of levers once used by government to support economic growth. In new trade model, we should embrace the kind of economic partnership that have at their core a commitment to equality, public reinvestment, economic renewal that is both sustainable and democratic. Nearly 20 years ago, together with trade unions across the Americas, we articulated elements of such an alternative trade and investment agreement in the labor platform for the Americas. In the wake of the 2009 economic crisis, the international trade union movement made proposal that will put sustainable economic renewal and decent work at the center of our recovery efforts. Now we have a government that is taking this suggestion seriously in their progressive change agenda. Labor rights has never been treated equally to many of the rights granted to investors. But the ambitious labor chapter table in the NAFTA marks a significant change. We hope the government continues to build on this effort in the Pacific Alliance talks. This would be especially meaningful since we know labor rights are precarious both in Peru, Colombia, and Mexico. And we know that Canadian corporations are bad actors on environmental issues and labor rights in many of these countries. But alternative trade model must go beyond stronger labor rights. The ability of government to regulate in the public interest must be protected. And the ability of government to take actions on climate change must be a priority over investors' rights. Canada must seek a much stronger exemption in all free trade agreements in a manner consistent with Canadian government obligation to Indigenous people in Canada. All FTA text should include a wide-ranging, comprehensive, and a clear exemption of Indigenous rights, freedoms, and interests from the scope of the agreement. The renegotiated NAFTA set a standard for consultation, collaboration, and inclusivity in trade talks, but that work has only just begun. We need to build on this, for example, making studies available, studies that will show the likely economic and social impact of this deal on a range of issues. Study that will establish a system of regulatory monitoring and assessment of specific outcomes of FTA, both positive and negative. For those who say progressive trade is a distraction, I will ask, can we not have an agreement that is at the center goal the creation of decent job and sustainable development? The Canadian labour movement is determined to ensure that any new trade agreement deals are fair and are protected of workers' rights, public service, the government right to regulate in the public interest, and our environment. It is time to take a new approach to trade that puts the interests of working people and the environment first. The last point I would make, which is always something I try to clarify, our members throughout this country work in sectors that are highly dependent on our ability to trade with other countries. We recognize the importance of trade and, more importantly, the need for us to expand that, but at the same time, we recognize we don't have to compromise the basic principle of workers' rights in the environment, Indigenous and women's rights in the context of how we do trade going forward. Thank you on behalf of the Canadian Labour Congress, and I look forward to any questions the committee may have.
Well, thank you very much, sir. And we're going to try to get back to the St. John Port Authority. Mr. Dixon, can you hear us now? Put your hand up if you can hear us. Uh-oh. Okay. I think maybe we just have a bit of a delay. So do you want to start your presentation again?
Okay. They have a problem with their mic.
On their side?
Yeah.
Sir, if you can hear us, then it seems like there's a problem with your side with your mic.
Maybe. And we can see him and listen to him on the cell phone.
We'll see because of translation.
It'd be like a bad kung fu movie.
C'est correct.
Okay. So, who has his number? He said he has his phone beside him.
Yeah. Can we suspend for a few minutes?
Okay, we're going to suspend for a few minutes here. Okay, can you hear us fine?
Yes, I can hear you fine
Okay.
in my earpiece.
Okay, go ahead. You got the floor, and if you can be brief, and then we can have some dialogue. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to be as brief as possible. So as members of the committee are aware, Port St. John, also known as the St. John Port Authority, is located on the Bay of Fundy and the southern coast of New Brunswick. Port St. John provides a gateway into North America for maritime commerce. It handles bulk, break bulk, and container cargoes. Petroleum products, potash, containers, and cruise provide the mainstay of our port business, while other commodities make a varying contribution. In recognition that many of today's consumer and manufactured goods move in container, we are now focused on significant opportunities being presented with the completion of the Panama Canal expansion and anticipated trade growth for East Coast ports. The port is well situated to take advantage of the north-south trade routes, as well as emerging opportunities in Europe and Asia. We're focused on growth at Port St. John, growth that includes building capacity at our cargo terminals, strengthening our business, developing collaboration with shipping and rail partners, and working with economic development agencies such as ACOA on international trade and foreign direct investment opportunities. And we've seen results from this focus. Since 2012, we have had MSC, the world's second largest container line, calling at Port St. John on a weekly basis with a service to Freeport, Bahamas, and Caicedo in the Dominican Republic. Both offer transshipment destinations to countries further afield. Now, last year, CMA CGM, the world's third largest container line, also began to call on a weekly basis. These two lines offer our importers and exporters competitive options and connections to global markets, but particularly in the north-south corridor. To support these ambitious growth goals that we have, we needed strong terminal operations partners with a focus on international business development that is aligned with our own. So in this regard, a major development took place last year when DP World became the new terminal operator of our West Side facilities. They're the fourth largest operator in the world. We have a long-standing connection with North America via CN's vast network, and we have recent success in partnership among short line providers into the New England marketplace, expanding our target market and providing alternatives that were not previously cost-effective. In our international marketing efforts, we've been working closely with ACOA on a north-south bilateral trade development, which includes Mexico, Brazil, and Chile. In fact, I will be traveling to those countries later this month in conjunction with our cargo development manager to engage in business meetings over a 2-week period designed to uncover opportunities for increased trade. Our ongoing work with ACOA complements Canada's focus on trade growth and the Pacific Alliance countries of Chile, Mexico, Peru, and Colombia. Today, our trade with these countries is valued at $31.7 billion for Canada, and $182 million of that is specifically Atlantic Canada. On the export side, our Canadian exports are $6 billion in goods to these four Pacific Alliance countries, and of this, nearly $118 million is exported from Atlantic Canada. So clearly, as a country, trade with Chile, Mexico, Peru, and Colombia is significant, and with trade agreements, it's bound to grow. Given our natural geographic advantage on the north-south trade route and our marine infrastructure capacity building and the trade and transportation partnerships we've established, we believe there are advantages for Port St. John in the Pacific Alliance with Chile, Mexico, Peru, and Colombia. So for reasons I've outlined today, at Port St. John, we believe our regional and national economy will benefit from the introduction of reduced tariffs on importation of goods and materials from these countries. Increasing imports at Port St. John is a vital part in balancing trade in our container sector. Having more balance allows for increased cost competitiveness for shippers and receivers at our port. Having greater import volumes at Port St. John will also allow for better economies of scale for our existing exporters. Improving the balance of trade has been a major component of our North-South trade strategy. So in conclusion, we appreciate the attention of the committee and the invitation to provide comments today. For us, the opportunity for increased trade with the Pacific Alliance is about a brighter and more prosperous future for Port St. John and our stakeholders through increased trade and competitiveness. I hope I've been able to provide some information that the committee will find valuable as you carry out your important work. And now I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you, sir. And also, we had our committee also had the pleasure of being at your port last year. I think it was last year or the year before when we were doing the TPP study. So it's good to hear.
Very good.
Good to hear from you again. And we're going to start with dialogue with the MPs, and we're going to start with the Conservatives for 5 minutes. Mr. Holback, you got the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And Andrew, it's great to see you here and hear you today. That's nice to see and hear.
Yeah, it's great to be heard.
Andrew, I'm so excited that we've got the port in St. John's. I think it's very important for Canada, and especially when we start seeing the BC government doing what it's doing on the West Coast and starting to restrict our ability to ship stuff through the West Coast. It just means more things are going to go south and going to go east, and we're going to need your port more and more. Now, in your presentation, you talked about petroleum products coming through the port. Are you exporting petroleum products through your port, or are you importing?
We're doing both, actually. We have Canada's largest refinery, Irving Oil, here. So primarily we're importing crude oil, and then we're exporting refined petroleum products. We also have an LNG terminal where we're importing LNG. So actually our tonnage of petroleum products makes up a huge portion of what we do as a port.
So that's all import, crude, export, refined products. So it's not Canadian oil that's getting refined there, of course. So that's partly disappointing, but in the same breath, I guess you got to do what you got to do. Now, I understand you guys had a challenge when potash closed their mines that export a lot of potash to there, but I understand you're picking up a lot of potash shipments at this point. Where are those shipments going to? Are we seeing them going into the Asian Pacific region? Are we seeing them going into the Brazil and countries like that? Or
yeah, we did have quite a major hit when with the mine closure, and we expect that at some point that will reopen. But we had a record year of exports last year, as you are aware, and that was rail from Saskatchewan. The biggest market would be Brazil, but certainly Latin America through other Latin American countries, through Central America, we're primarily where most of our potash is destined.
now you talked about the Pacific Alliance, and of course, when you think of the countries involved, other than Colombia, you'd say, well, they're all West Coast markets for the West Coast ports. But you're very aggressive. You're saying that you're actually going to get a lot of shipping activity into that region, of course, with the expansion of the Panama Canal. Any idea of the number of jobs this is going to create in your port and the economic spin-off for the region by having the ability to ship through your port to these markets?
It's difficult to say. We really look at the whole block of Latin America in total, and two of the countries that we're discussing today are available on both East and West Coast. The other two are available through the Panama or around the southern tip of South America. So we're just starting to see, particularly in the container world, with CMA CGM, imports from both Mexico and Chile, and we would expect to have reach into Peru, Colombia, and of course the east coast of South America is a major target.
So again, you can't put a number on the number of jobs, but it's definitely going to secure the port and the port's future by having that extra capacity in those markets to ship into. Is that fair to say?
Yes. In the whole, we need all of our market sectors, and we need everything to be kind of running on 8 cylinders. So we have a huge modernization project with a container terminal, and a lot of we're investing $205 million along with our partners in the federal and provincial governments. So it's all part of the formula that's going to grow the port in all sectors, but particularly in the container sector, where really in Atlantic Canada, the options for shippers are Halifax and St. John. So it's important to have those two options.
So again, if it wasn't for CETA and now Pacific Alliance, and of course we have trade deals in these countries as we speak, you wouldn't have that growth, would you?
No, we would be restricted. There would always be some import and export activity, even with tariffs and other obstructions to trade, if you like. But a trade deal and free trade and so on only serves to open up those channels. And we always see when these trade deals are successfully negotiated that volumes increase, and we take those opportunities to our exporters in the region and importers as well.
Just one quick question. You're a unionized port, are you not?
We are, yes.
Okay, so these are unionized jobs.
Okay, thank you,
Yep,
Mr.
they're
Hobach.
ILA. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Dix and Mr. Hobach. And we're going to move to the Liberals now for 5 minutes. Madam Ludwig, you get the floor.
Good morning. Good morning, Andrew. How are you?
Good.
So obviously my riding is New Brunswick Southwest, which borders on the Port of St. John. So thank you so much for being here today. I have
My pleasure.
A couple of questions for you. One is on the environmental side. I just want to go on that one. But the other one, Andrew, is on the infrastructure. So certainly a great deal of work is being done with the St. John port. And I wonder if you can comment on the adequacy or the challenges regarding rail and adequate number of truck drivers and trucking in the St. John area for rail on, rail off.
Okay, well, specifically, I guess, first of all, with respect to rail, we do have a great connection through New Brunswick Southern is the rail line that purchased about 20 years ago a short line from CP. So through New Brunswick Southern, we connect right in St. John with CN Rail and up through Moncton and then into central Canada. And then also through New Brunswick Southern, we can go down through Maine, Central Maine Quebec Railway, connect to CP near Montreal, or down through the Pan Am rail system into the U.S. with CSX and Norfolk Southern. So we actually have optionality in rail, which isn't always the case on the East Coast.
Great. What about on the trucking aspect?
Yeah, with respect to trucking, we've got some major carriers in New Brunswick and then some smaller as well, but this is the home to Day and Ross, Midland, Sunbury. We have other small carriers that, like Black's Transfer, for instance, that do a lot of work within New Brunswick to the port. So while there's a challenge in that industry with a lack of qualified operators and drivers, we have never had that challenge manifest itself as being a problem for our import-export activity.
Great. So just adding on to that then, looking at the opportunities, unfortunately with the closing of the Piccadilly mine, and that has been a significant impact on the area, why is it that Saskatchewan potash is now being shipped over to St. John and then exported from there? Obviously there was an opportunity.
Yeah, so no, that's a great question. And a lot of the time people will think, well, Saskatchewan is, basically on the West Coast, so you'd ship out of the West Coast. But in fact, it's still quite a distance to go through either Canadian or U.S. ports on the West Coast. So in shipping to the East Coast, CN has been able to put a program together to ship longer trains. They've established some economies of scale that were very helpful to Canpotex, the shipper in this case, and it's really worked very well, particularly in the fact that a lot of the destinations are east coast of South America. So in Latin America, either Central or South America. So if you're going to Brazil, it's one thing to consider what the origin is, and then the other to consider what the destination is. And just their volume altogether, they have ready infrastructure and a terminal here in the Port of St. John. So the business has worked very well. In 2017, as I mentioned, we actually saw our biggest shipment year ever of potash exports. So there's obviously it's working pretty well.
Great, thank you. My next question is actually, I'm presenting before the House in March a private member's motion on the protection of endangered whales. And I'm wondering, Andrew, if you can speak to any changes in shipping lanes or speeds regarding container ships as well as cruise lines coming up the East Coast to basically avert any ship strikes with the North Atlantic right whale.
Yeah, so a pre-qualifier first that our VP of Operations and Harbor Master, Captain Chris Hall, would be the one that would be most qualified to kind of answer that question. But while this issue has been very sort of newsworthy lately with the unfortunate realities of what's happening with right whale deaths, this has been something that for the last couple of decades, if not beyond, have been at the forefront in the Bay of Fundy. And that's where I can speak to primarily shipping lanes and patterns have been altered, and speed has been altered in order to ensure that everything possible is being done to protect the whale population in the Bay of Fundy. I know that there's now some further movement to assist with that in the St. Lawrence. I wouldn't be up on what's taking place there currently, so I wouldn't like to comment.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Ludwig. We're going to move over to the NDP now. And Ms. Ramsey, you got the floor for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you to our presenters today. I'd like to say that I believe that we have the best workers here in Canada. We really do. And if we are on a level playing field with workers in other countries, we can absolutely be competitive and excel. But I believe we have a responsibility to ensure that we don't turn a blind eye to the working and human rights conditions of workers in the countries that we have trading relationships with. I want to point specifically to a Canadian Labour Congress response to a report that came out. This is dated Thursday, February 2nd, 2017. And this is about the rights of Colombians to collectively bargain, to have a union, and what is the reality of people who attempt to do so. And there's quotes in here about the anti-union hostility, intimidation, and threats that exist for Colombians who are trying to form a union, have some freedom of association to improve their working conditions. And I note in here that there's long-standing complaints of violence, intimidation used to restrict workers' freedom of association and collective bargaining. I wonder if you can speak to this report, or this response rather, to the report that you put out, and tell us about the conditions that exist for working people in Colombia today.
Colombia has been, as you know, probably one of the most violent places on the planet for trade unionists. We've had more workers killed in Colombia, trade unionists killed in Colombia, than any country in the world. And not just me saying that, it's a report, of course, of the ILO. They have established, of course, a process within the ILO to hold Colombia accountable, to try and reduce this violence, and more importantly, to try and change that. Since we have signed our free trade agreement with Colombia, of course, that allows us the opportunity to bring complaint to the Canadian government about the Colombian government behavior and what they have not been able to do in bringing their laws into compliance with the trade agreement. Those complaints was sustainable in what we filed with the Canadian government. Now there is a process where the Canadian government, the Minister of Labour, will be engaging Colombia to, of course, laws that they would have to repeal to ensure they're not in violation with our free trade agreement, but more importantly, also take positive steps. One of the other development, I think, which is in a positive way, for the first time, of course, Colombia have concluded a major peace agreement with the guerrillas that they've having this war going on for decades. And we're hopeful that this could substantially change the climate in which and how trade unions, of course, have been experiencing violence in that country. Mm-hmm. Time will tell, but I think the peace agreement certainly will contribute significantly to help make that better. But so we're hoping the minister will be traveling to Colombia to meet with our counterpart in Colombia. I know our officials have been working since they have issued their report, and they're finding, and we're hoping now the Colombia government will, of course, show tangible movement Because in absence of that, it will be a complete breach of the agreement we have signed with them in terms of the provision in the Colombia Trade Agreement.
As far as the other countries in the Pacific Alliance, certainly Mexico is top of mind. We're talking a lot about the rights of Mexican workers. Of course, there was a horrible incident with a worker that was murdered outside of a mine just last week. And when we look at Peru and Chile, I wonder if you can speak to these other Pacific Alliance countries and their ability to organize, bargain collectively, and the workers' rights that exist in those countries.
Well, in the renegotiations of NAFTA, one of our persistent, I think, challenge we face, in addition to the United States, despite the rhetoric, is that we have tabled probably the best labor chapter to say, if this truly is about how we improve the conditions, here is a path forward to do so with this new provision that has been tabled in the renegotiation. Of course, neither the Americans nor the Mexicans have yet acquiesced to Canada's demand. And I could say without any hesitation, the government has been persistent and committed to push, of course, those countries to say, listen, we've talked a great deal about, how we can do things. Mexico is the country, when we first signed the NAFTA agreement, had better laws than Canada. The unfortunate thing, they have not enforced their laws and continue, of course, not to enforce their laws. And I think that's been where I think the frustration that have evolved in the last 20-something years of NAFTA have shown that there's complete weakness. Peru, of course, and Chile, we had a long-standing agreement with Chile. Most recently, of course, the Chilean government made a major effort to reform their labor laws in that country. I think it's a positive step. Whether that would sustain, is just changed of course, the government have just, new government has been elected. So we'll see.
Sorry to interrupt you, but do you know then if the labor chapter that's been put forward or the labor provisions that have been put forward in NAFTA, has that been put forward in the Pacific Alliance Agreement as well?
I don't know that
Short answer, please.
for a fact, but we will ask, obviously, the department whether it has been submitted or not.
Thank you, Ms. Ramsey, and we're going to move back to the Liberals. And Mr. Dhaliwal, you get the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the committee. The presenters, my question goes to Mr. Dixon. Mr. Dixon, are there any security concerns when you do import and export to these Pacific Alliance countries?
Security concerns. Basically, we have a very strong relationship with CBSA, Canada Border Services, here in St. John. And there are several initiatives that we work on together. They're on site as almost an employee and an operator within the port, with some very sophisticated equipment for detection, both in export and import. But the emphasis is on import when you're looking at South American and Central American countries. And they have the ability to grow in their analyzing and in their checking of the container volumes, along with the growth in business. So we stay very close with them. In fact, interestingly enough, we have a meeting of several people from CBSA and our folks next week, talking about this exact subject and what will be required, what infrastructure is required, and how they can fit in best with the modernization and the growth and ensure that they're ready. So I'm very comfortable with the process and with the current program in that regard.
Thank you, Hassan. Again, always great to see you and the great work that you do to protect workers' rights. You mentioned Colombia, that we had a free trade agreement, and I was on the committee at the time, and I had the opportunity to travel to Colombia and see the first-hand situation on the ground, how UNO was helping the displaced people, But you say that things are improved with signing the agreement. Do you agree?
Well, I think that for the first time, we have some standards that Colombia have to, of course, adhere to. And I think the Canadian government, certainly in the complaint we had filed, certainly found that Colombia has not met their commitment under the current free trade agreement with them. And the government said they're going to be traveling there because there are some laws that they had passed which they have to repeal because it's completely contradict what's in the Canada-Colombia free trade agreement. And I think what was very good about the process is that The Canadian officials that participate in that process was very transparent in their engagement, the opportunity to go to Colombia to meet with, of course, those who were filing the complaint, trying to investigate in a very comprehensive way, and subsequently produce a report which we're very proud of. The Americans did exactly the same thing with completely different outcome. So we're hopeful our Minister of Labor, Patty Haidu, will be traveling to Colombia and say, hey, you have to meet these recommendations. Otherwise, you're in breach of our relationship in this free trade agreement.
So do you see that if we have an agreement in place, it's better than not having an agreement in place?
Agreement allows us to hold the other country to a certain standard. By equally so, they can hold us to the same standard. It's not a one-way street. It works both ways. If we're not in compliance, we should be held accountable. In regard to this thing, this particular agreement, the question was asked earlier. The labor chapter has been tabled in NAFTA. I think many those who looked at it, including us, we would say it's probably the best has ever been tabled in any trade agreement to date. We are aware, to come back to resolving, answering Tracy's question, we are aware that the department will be submitting that chapter as part of this process for the Canadian Pacific Alliance Free Trade Agreement.
When we see free trades, it helps small businesses grow. When small businesses grow, the workers grow as well, and the middle class grows. So would you agree that having free trade, it helps the small businesses and it helps Canadians that are middle class?
I'd like to.
Sure. Angela, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to say that there has never been a successful labor complaint under a free trade agreement that has resulted in the other country having to do anything. So it has never been the case that the free trade agreement labor chapter has actually resulted in concrete change for workers in that other country. We have other venues to do similar things that we're doing in Colombia right now, for example, through the ILO. That might result in the same outcomes as this FTA. But what the FTA has allowed is Canadian companies are there exploiting workers right now. It's Canadian companies that we have the complaints against. And so the ombudsperson that was announced is useful in terms of that, and actually far more useful than perhaps the current labor chapter that we have in the Canada-Colombia Free Trade Agreement. And in terms of small businesses, often they don't have access to understanding the free trade agreement or to the enforcement mechanism in the free trade agreement. So it's usually large corporations that benefit, that have the lawyers that can fight the ISCS claims. So often we say that it's not small businesses that benefit from free trade agreements.
Okay, sir, your time is well up, and we're going to move over to second hour. We might have time for two more MPs, so we're going to go, Madame Lapointe, you're up.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, bienvenue aux témoins. C'est avec grand.
Thank you. It is with great pleasure that I listened to your presentation. Very interesting. Mr. Dixon, the Port of St. John, as we were saying earlier, we went in September 2017. It was very interesting. And you talked about potash that mainly came from Saskatchewan. Are there any other products such as that, other merchandise where there are opportunities and that could be shipped in order to improve the capacity or raise the capacity of the St. John port?
In conjunction with the growth and the modernization of our west side terminals, we are taking a very targeted approach to specific commodity groups that we know are exported from central Canada or imported to central Canada from the Latin American countries. So we've always been very involved in forest products, but there's so many other things, consumer items and plywoods, veneers, hardwoods that we're currently targeting. And when I'm down in Brazil, Chile, and Mexico the last 2 weeks in February, this is going to be some of the discussion that we're having with freight forwarders and with the embassies, and also with the offices of the two major container lines, to uncover what are those opportunities and to develop a business development plan for the next couple of years to really exploit the fact that we now have such great container connections down to that area.
Good.
So yes, we see a lot of opportunity.
Merci. Vous parliez tantôt des infrastructures.
Thank you. You were also talking about infrastructure, and you talked about the modernization, and you referred to this modernization. You also spoke of railways and trucking. So, what is your percentage of what is sent to Maine that is sent to, of what you receive and what you export? What percentage comes from central Canada and Quebec versus what is sent out to Maine? And also with regards to trucking and rail. Another sub question. Do you have good capacity, good rail capacity?
Of goods that are shipped. There's three areas or three regions, I guess, that I'd note. One would be down into the U.S., could be Maine and New England. The other would be regional, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and then central Canada. A lot of our container business, because we have other sectors that involve different regions, but our container business is very strongly based in regional cargoes in Atlantic Canada that are exported. We're just uncovering the opportunities with the new lines that are calling for import. But in order to have that business model and to have those container lines calling, it's very important to have connections to Quebec, Ontario, and beyond. So we have shipments every single week that are exported and imported to central Canada as well. You mentioned about Maine. That's a developing business. We used to do a very big business exporting from Maine through St. John with forest products, but we saw a lot of closures in Maine, forest product producing mills, paper and pulp. And so there's a lot less that is actually going offshore, but we have good opportunity in central Maine and in fact just over the border in Woodland, Maine for exports through the port as well. And we're working on those currently, enjoying some business, but we see that that's going to certainly grow.
Merci
beaucoup. And what was the second part?
Mais, je vais quand même poser une question au Congrès de...
Yes, I'd like to ask a question to the Canadian Labour Congress, so thank you very much. We didn't hear you speak on the issue of temporary and foreign workers. In my riding, we have a lot of products. You talked about the workers' rights, but what are your thoughts on the way that we could improve the situation for foreign workers? What would be the opportunities? Many come from Chile and Peru.
Since this program has been created, there's been consistent documentation about the abuse in the program. They have, of course, the government have taken some steps, but again, we think we've got to do more. The pathway to become a Canadian landed immigrant and a citizenship, I think, is one of the most positive developments. We think there are other aspects of the program that continue to be problematic. As you know, the federal government is the one that authorized for temporary foreign workers to enter the country. But of course, when these workers get to Canada, they operate under provincial jurisdiction. So the province is then required to enforce their labor laws, employment standard laws, of course, housing laws, and what have you. And when there's no inspectorate of a workplace, we see consistent abuse. Most recently, been documented workers that came to help build a temple who were absolutely horrified as to what was going on when the story was exposed. And most recently, of course, was documented some workers working in a Burger King facility end up living in the facility, not just working in the facility. So there have been consistent pattern of abuse in the program, and I think the government has got to be far more aggressive in what we have said. They should end the low-skill program. There was really no demonstration why we need low-skill. It was never part originally of the program. Where there are some challenges in terms of certain sectors and skill, we established a process of how we can get workers to fill. But more importantly, if we're going to bring workers here to fill those jobs, we should also provide a pathway for them to remain and become a Canadian landed immigrant and a citizen going forward.
Sorry, we're way over time, but I let it go for quite a while. It was an important question, but it should have been probably asked at first. But it's all good. We have time for one more MP, and Mr. Dreesen, you got the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you to our witnesses today. Actually, myself and Mr. Hoback a number of years ago through Parliamericas, had a chance to go to Colombia, and at that time, while we happened to be there, was when the talks were taking place in Havana between FARC and the government, and we were talking to the various groups that were going over for meetings, such as the trade unionists, families of those people that had been kidnapped and murdered and so on. So the discussions were very fulsome, I should say, and so that, and included with our Canada-Colombia free trade agreements, where a human rights component was associated with it, I think our standing in Colombia is very strong. They recognize that we have been a great partner for them and with them. So. And of course, the imports and exports that we've had with Colombia over the years have helped them, and of course have helped us as well. One of the main imports that Canada has from Colombia, of course, is coal, which is a certain irony as well, and of course also petroleum products. And with petroleum products, they are coming in with with world price. And we continue to sell ours because our majority of our petroleum products are landlocked at a discount, which of course hurts every Canadian. When you look at the relationship that exists there. So just I suppose one of the things that I would like to first of all ask Mr. Dickson, how many oil cars can you take per day from Saskatchewan and Alberta in order to run through your facilities?
Right. So the capacity of oil cars, and we had a tremendous amount that were coming in. I'm going back maybe between 1 and 2 years ago, and they come into Irving Oil private facilities. And I know that they expanded that capacity during that time because there was a lot of activity that was coming by rail as opposed to vessel. I'd be hesitant to quote specific volumes. I know that it's the Irving Group, and if they see that as being a good source of raw materials, then they have the sort of geographic area to expand and grow, and have shown that they'll put in the rail tracks and accommodate the rail. CN has been primarily bringing that in, and they have a great system down through an interchange in Moncton. So I would say that the capacity is not limited, provided that there's a little bit of lead time and infrastructure can be put in place. But I think right today there's a overcapacity of infrastructure for rail cars. So there should be there would be no difficulty with an increase in business coming over land as opposed to water right now.
So when you speak about that, and we're having super tankers coming in with oil from other parts of the world, what are the safety procedures that are used, and are they different than the safety procedures that would have been used on the West Coast for similar types of tankers?
So I can't speak to East and West Coast and what the difference might be between safety. I can't imagine that it would vary in any substantive way. And we're, of course, part of a group of the Association of Canadian Port Authorities, and we operate under the same rules under the Canada Marine Act with 18 ports across Canada. So I would say that the safety rules are quite consistent. What the specifics are, as far as from a safety standpoint, coming into St. John, I know once again my colleague and the Harbor Master, Captain Chris Hall, would be able to speak to specifics, but we work very closely with Irving Oil, with the crude oil tankers. We know what the activity is each day. The monobuoy, where a lot of the oil is discharged, is something that we monitor. And the communication is very intense because of the potential in the event of something going wrong. Obviously, the impact could be very great. The only thing that we tend to find anytime is a very is if we get a small incidence of leakage in a system, it's detected right away, it's isolated, anything is shut down, and it's resolved. So we have a very good safety regimen in the port and in the Bay of Fundy in total with respect to oil cargoes. We've been doing it for a very long time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dreeshen. And that wraps up our time and our first panel. And again, I thank the witnesses for coming. Thank you very much. And sorry about the technical difficulties, but it seems like we got back on track and there was some good dialogue, questions and answers going back and forth. Thank you very much. And if you want a copy of our report in the upcoming months, it will be released. And we're looking forward to that. So we're going to only break for a couple minutes, folks, here because we got another panel ready to go and we want to stay on time. So we're just going to suspend for a few minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, good morning, folks. This is the second portion of our today's meeting. We're continuing on our study of the potential agreement between Canada and Pacific Alliance. Welcome, witnesses. Thank you for coming. And if some of you are here for the first time, try to keep your briefs at least under 5 minutes, I guess, and so we can have lots of room for dialogue with the MPs. We have 1 hour altogether, so we're going to move along here, and we're going to start off with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and Mr. Vega. Oh, Madam Vega, thank you for coming, and you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you to the committee for conducting this study and for inviting the Canadian Chamber of Commerce to provide comments on our views on a potential agreement between Canada and the Pacific Alliance. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce is supportive of preferential trade agreements as a means to expand Canadian exports and to reduce barriers to trade. As a trading nation, these are important tools to remain globally competitive and also to help our economy grow. Now, specifically in the Pacific Alliance, and I'll try and keep my remarks fairly brief, the Chamber is supportive of the government's interest in seeking associate membership for 4 main reasons, and I'll outline those for you. The first one is an FTA with the Pacific Alliance would upgrade, or it would modernize, in a sense, the individual agreements that we have with each of the 4 Pacific Alliance members. And while this might seem perhaps as an unnecessary thing to do, it's actually it's quite relevant given the level of integration and coordination that the Pacific Alliance members are pursuing, particularly in areas like regulatory, for example, or trade facilitation. So we know for a fact that the terms of the agreement under Pacific Alliance would be far superior for Canada than the current scenario. So those bilaterals, we see them as a good foundational start for an eventual FTA. The second reason is first mover advantage. Canada has been an observer member of Pacific Alliance for a number of years, since 2012. And that gives us an early start, but that window of opportunity is narrow. It's closing fairly quickly, in the sense that last year, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore all joined Canada in the short list of countries that are seeking associate membership to the Pacific Alliance. And we know that roughly 50 countries are currently observers in the Pacific Alliance. So if we look at it another way, Canada is at this moment in time the only G7 nation in that short list of countries seeking accession to Pacific Alliance, and the only one in the hemisphere. So that gives us a very early advantage. And an opportunity really to play a significant role and a leading role even in the trade relationships in the Americas. The third reason is strategic. Canada is right now in a privileged position in that we have a CIIT agreement. We are still in the mix for CPTPP. And what we're observing in trade rules globally is, in a way, a race to the highest gold standard for modern rules of trade. And what's interesting is that the Pacific Alliance is, in a way, already there. It's very forward-looking. They have a high level of ambition when it comes to things like digital trade, for example, or new industries like fintech. And it would be very valuable for Canada to be a part of that. We're seeing the competition or that race is accelerating. We see Japan moving very quickly on their deal with the EU. The EU themselves modernizing and closing a number of agreements. So it's important to keep those things in mind. Of course, improved access and rules of trade are good for businesses already operating in that region. But beyond that, being a member of Pacific Alliance or an associate member would give Canada a voice also in the accession of future members, which is, once again, a significant advantage. And the fourth reason is, and perhaps this should be the most obvious one, is that Pacific Alliance is an attractive region on its own. It put together, the 4 economies of the Pacific Alliance make up the equivalent of the 9th largest economy in the world. It's growing fast. It has a large and young population, and it has taken significant steps towards economic reform. In fact, 2 of those countries are OECD members. So really, if we look at it, there's no real reason why we shouldn't pursue this agreement. It's just perhaps there's been a lot on our plates and our attention has been perhaps elsewhere. We've been quite preoccupied with other agreements, but it's a quite attractive region in its own right. And arguably, with the exception of Mexico, some might say, well, they don't really represent a big chunk of our export markets. They don't really feature in the top 5 countries, but that doesn't mean that they're not buying from elsewhere. And that's where an improved access would help. It would be an added tool in the bag so that Canadian exporters can access or improve our share in that market. Now, of course, trade negotiations are complex. We have a lot on our plate, but this one's still relatively at an early stage, and yet a lot of the work has already been done. So we'll continue to observe how negotiations proceed. But we often recommend to the government that we look for easy wins or aim for the low-hanging fruit, and this is exactly it. Pacific Alliance is a modern agreement. It has solid foundations. It opens new markets with relatively low costs in an attractive region, and it supports our ambition to diversify our trade. So overall, just to close, the Chamber is supportive of this initiative. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and for all the work you're doing, not in our country, but internationally. And thank you for helping us on our previous study, we did on NAFTA, and you were a big part of organizing our meeting in Washington with the Chamber of Commerce. So thank you very much. It went really well, and we had good dialogue there. So thank you again for your presentation. And we're going to move on to the Canada Pork Council, Canadian Pork Council, and we have Mr. Roy here. Roy. Monsieur Roy. Welcome, and there's 2 of you. Mr. Storty, thank you for coming. So you guys got the floor.
Merci.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to appear before the Standing Committee and provide the perspectives of Canada's pork producers on the matter of a potential trade agreement between Canada and the Pacific Alliance. I am a pork producer from Saint-Jules in Quebec, and I'm here today as a member of the Board of Directors and second Vice Chairman for the Canadian Pork Council, the national voice for over 7,000 hog producers in Canada. The meat industry is by far the largest component of this country's food processing sector. Our producers raise animals from coast to coast, with the largest pork production and processing facilities clustered in Quebec, Ontario, and Manitoba. Direct farm gate sales of Canadian pork in 2016 totaled $4.1 billion and created over 31,000 farm jobs in rural Canada. The pork industry is a major contributor to Canada's GDP. Additionally, food processing creates more jobs than any other segment of the Canadian manufacturing sector, providing employment for 65,000 workers. Meatpacking and processing plants are often either the primary or major employer in towns and cities located across Canada. Mr. Chairman, the members of this committee are no doubt aware that export markets are absolutely critical to the current and future prosperity of the Canadian livestock and meat sector. Meat processors and exporters must identify foreign markets for more than 70% of Canadian pork. Therefore, it should not be surprising that pork producers have been ardent and steadfast supporters of all initiatives that contribute to opening new export markets and expanding access to existing markets. The Canadian Pork Council and producers welcomed the news out of Japan that an agreement was reached on the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP, and we would like to thank Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, International Trade Minister François Champagne, Agriculture and Agri-Food Minister Lawrence Macaulay, the Minister of Foreign Affairs Chrystia Freeland, the negotiating team, and all other Canadian representatives that supported the request that this trade deal be concluded as soon as possible and contributed to making it happen. Producers are confident that Canadian pork will soon have a competitive access in key markets in Japan and in developing markets such as Singapore, Vietnam, and Malaysia. The signing of this agreement in March and its ratification shortly thereafter will only signal further investment in the sector. Because of the improved access to key markets, Canadian pork producers can keep doing what they do best, knowing that their livelihood and that of thousands of other Canadians in rural and urban communities who work in the pork industry are supported by this latest agreement. Canadian producers also welcome the Canadian government's efforts to expand economic ties with the Pacific Alliance through a free trade agreement. A key reason for the growth of Canadian pork exports has been the establishment of free trade agreements with strategic partners. As you know, at present, Canada benefits from bilateral trade agreements with each of the members of the Pacific Alliance. The free trade agreement with Mexico as part of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, was brought into force on January 1st, 1994. The free trade agreement with Chile was implemented July 5, 1997, and FTAs with Peru and Colombia were brought into force on August 1st, 2009 and August 15th, 2011, respectively. We see the potential agreement between Canada and the Pacific Alliance as an opportunity to improve exports in several areas. However, recognizing the importance of questions, I would like to highlight just a few key points and leave it to my colleague, Mr. Lavoie, to explain further.
Wrap up.
Yep.
Just to wrap it up, we would appreciate. Go ahead.
Yes. 3 points à
3 points to consider. First of all, that the allocation process in Colombia for Canadian pork products be simplified. Second, that the Colombian government recognize that Canadian swine herd as trichina-free, permitting exports of chilled pork to that market. And 3, that the quota for Canadian pork products be drastically increased and the existing tariff rate be reduced in Peru. Thank you.
And Mr. Waugh, and as a farmer, I know your industry went through some hard times over the years, and it's very good to see it's very vibrant and doing well. So thank you for coming. And we're going to move over to the Canada Pork International. And Mr. Lavoie, go ahead. You got the floor, sir.
Thank you very much for having me here this morning. On behalf of our members, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to talk on the free trade agreement eventuality with Canada and the Pacific Alliance. Canada Pork International were established in 1991, and we are a joint venture of the Canadian Pork Council present here and the Canadian Meat Council representing the Canadian packers and trading companies. So our focus is really on having market access and promoting Canadian pork in foreign markets. So we're really involved in trade and supporting companies doing business in over 100 markets. The Canadian pork industry exports for over $4 billion annually. To give you a visual representation of that, it's the equivalent of 50,000 sea containers every year that we're exporting. So we're a huge driver for jobs. And all those containers are also, they're all getting on trucks and train before they're getting shipped. So we are a big mover in the agribusiness sector. Pork is the largest meat industry in Canada. We're 70% depending on export. And actually our success, I can say, is directly linked to the government's ability to provide more competitive market access conditions than our competitors, the U.S. and the EU mainly. This is why, as Mr. Roy was referring, the announcement of TPP, well, CPTPP is such a great news for the Canadian pork industry. Not only it gives us an opportunity to have a better access for chilled pork to Japan, where we're competing head-to-head with the U.S., sharing 50% market share with them, but it also prevents us from falling behind on frozen products from the EU with their free trade agreement getting in place. So we're still feeling the impact of falling behind on the U.S.-Korea trade deal, and we've seen our business really affected there. So we're really positive for that news. That's going to have a tremendous impact for our industry. So if I'm getting into more specific details, as mentioned, I'm going to go through the 4 partners of the Pacific Alliance. Mexico is our 4th largest market, $200 million of trade, but we're already covered through NAFTA, TPP. So there's not, it's a very important market. There's not a whole lot, extra gain that we can have. It's the same thing for Chile. This FTA has become to maturity, where over the years they were TRQ and tariff, and now we have free trade. So is the U.S. So we're on a level playing field with them. I think really where we have the most gains to make is in Colombia. With their FTA, Colombia recognized the U.S. as being free of trichina, so they are able to ship fresh chilled pork to have access to the retail market in Colombia. So that gives them access to higher value markets, and also like the conditions right now are so different. The U.S. is free market for them, so there's no TRQ, there's no tariffs. We are basically right now after 6,000 tons a year, there's a 41% tariff kicking in. So you can tell that our trade pretty much stops around 6,000 tons a year. So there's this great benefit to catch the U.S. Just to give you an example, we're shipping for around $30 million every year to Colombia. They are at $200 million. So this is the kind of impact. I don't think that the market would grow because they already have access to the U.S. market. I think we would be able to get a much better share of that very good market. It's not a primary market, but it's an excellent secondary market for a lot of products. And what's important for in the pork business, I just came back to CPI. I've been myself in the trading business for the last 6 years, is having access to the best return market for every single cut. And this is where it's important. If they give some specific bones in Colombia, they're paying more than others for that type of product. This is where we're adding value to all the businesses in Canada. So it's not just looking at the market as a whole, but you have to look at the opportunity for specific products, and this is where we're creating value. Chile, we have an FTA, but right now it's 500 tons a year of TRQ. After that, there's a 25% duty. Really, I told you about the 50,000 containers earlier. This is 20 containers. So this is pretty limited. It's not a huge market, but we can definitely grow our business in that market. So basically, as I mentioned, the 3 main potential gains is in Colombia, getting access to chilled products, have a level playing field with the U.S. on tariffs, and also increasing the TRQ allocation, or have free trade with Peru. I think in conclusion, we're supporting the FTA with the Pacific Trade Alliance because we trust that the Canadian government has the resources to deal with all the trade deals in place and all front at the same time. TPP, NAFTA, China, ASEAN, and the Trade Pacific Alliance are all priorities for us. I think where we can measure the value of this deal for the Canadian pork industry is how quickly we can achieve an agreement, because we're going to get to free trade with Colombia in 2023, Peru 2025. So if we're in a position where this is going to take 4 or 5 years, that decreases the value for us. So I think the conditions are there. We have FTAs with all of those countries. I'm thinking this is something that could be achieved quickly, but to me, this is a very important factor in the success for the pork industry. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And before I go to the other MPs, I got a kind of a side question for you. And we often focus on the big trade agreements, but just on the Caribbean countries, just if you can give me a number, do we export much to all the Caribbean countries, the Canadian pork?
We are, but they are actually, I mean, if you'd have to look at the region. Just to give you examples, we have markets like U.S., China. They're like 300,000 tons. They're big markets. These markets are all between 2 and 12,000 tons a year, but they're very important because, again, some countries were shipping very high value products. There's some part of the animal that only these islands like, these countries. So this is very important for the overall value. Yes, I mean, Cuba is a very important market. Barbados, we're doing great business. I was actually looking at the trade numbers yesterday, and we're shipping 2,000 tons a year to the Dominican Republic. The U.S. is shipping 30,000. So there's something for me to look and investigate how we can do better. So definitely, when we take them as a whole, and plus there's opportunity for processed products, for hotel, the hotel industry is fairly important. This is something important to me as well.
Maybe someday our committee can look at that region sometimes down the road, and we have your input.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get going here. We're going to go right to the MPs here, and we're going to start with the Conservatives for 5 minutes. Mr. Kerry, you've got the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank the witnesses for being here. We're living in a very interesting time with the uncertainty of NAFTA, and I really liked your comments about how we have to look at these from the Chamber, you know, modernizing these individual agreements, first mover advantage, strategic advantages, and I was wondering if you could comment, the United States, for example, they are a big market for us, but they're also becoming one of the big competitors that we have. We look at the obvious, the resource sector, oil and gas, but of course in our agricultural community, it's huge as well. The United States just went through and modified their entire tax structure, and I was wondering if you could comment, because the importance of us keeping in sync with the United States as far as our competitiveness side of things, and how important these agreements are to get done fairly quickly, so we can have that competitive advantage if we're losing on other ends. How important is it to get these done now, taking into account the American changes on their taxes? Maybe we can, Mr. Lavoie, is that going to be causing your producers challenges right now?
Yes, I mean, this is one of them, but obviously we're competing with the U.S. on a daily basis. We have the advantage in Canada, I think, of having a better product, and I really believe it. And you see the impact of that in Japan, the success we're having right now just on the recognition of the quality of the product by the Japanese consumer. And this is also why I think TPP is going to get tremendous results. But we still have to compete on everything, because that success is actually, it can be washed away if price becoming like a huge factor. There's always, quality is one thing, but there's always a price linked to it. So whether it's on the feed, on the taxes, on the FTAs, everything, we have to look at everything. This is a huge factor. The currency, obviously, but I'm not here to talk about Korea, but we've seen the impact of having an FTA 3 years ahead. It's crazy when you look at the graph of the U.S. trade going like this, ours going like this. This is directly linked to the timeliness of the trade deal. So I agree. This is like, timing is so important for those agreements.
Well, thank you for that, because we do live in a different world. Madame Vega, could you comment on that as well? Because you brought it up, the strategic side of things, the first mover advantages. Could you please expand on that?
Yes, for sure. And I would agree with Mr. Lavoie for sure. I think competitiveness vis-a-vis the U.S. is a perennial issue for Canada. Yes, we trade with them. They're our biggest trading partner, but as well, like you mentioned, they're a close competitor. And trade agreements are just one of the pieces in that puzzle to succeed internationally. So we're looking at things like taxes, cost of doing business, access to talent, opening markets. I mean, all these things work together, and unfortunately, there's no really an easy solution. You have to look at all of them holistically, and how can you make the most out of your local conditions to improve your competitiveness overseas. So tax, I personally am not the in-house expert. I would recommend perhaps that you consult with our policy director at the chamber who looks at tax. But our recommendation has been to look at Canada in terms of our comparative competitiveness, and certainly tax or a review of our tax system is a part of that.
And Monsieur Roy, you mentioned the 3 points, and one of them was that the China-free issue, and I wonder if you could talk about this issue of non-tariff barriers and how important it is that with these new modern trade agreements that we address the non-tariff barriers that seems to be used by other players. Like Canada goes into these trade agreements, I always say we're the Boy Scout. You know, we do what we're supposed to do and everything, and then you get these other countries put in these barriers. Could you explain how important it is to modernize and get and address things like non-tariff barriers?
Just have to be a quick answer, please.
Yes, for non-tariff barriers, the question, especially with United States, there are some implicit problems that are not that clear as when you look at the numbers, but when it's time to go through the borders, you have some problem to go through, and this is a real problem for the production, not only for the old production. For the old production, so not only at the producer's level, but also at the retailer, at the processor level, we have some problem to go through the border. Even if there is no trade barriers, there is the technical trade barriers that comes in that hurts our market right now.
Thank you, Mr. Kerry. We're going to go over to Liberals. Mr. Fonseca, welcome back.
Thank you, Chair.
Looks
Thank you.
Good to see you getting on the mend.
Yeah, working it through.
There's always
yeah,
one
yeah,
of us seem to be going on the mend on this committee, so it's your
shoulder. And but Mr. Chair, first I'd just like to welcome and thank so much the presenters. You know, I thank you for your advocacy and for your strong voice for your members, but more so for the knowledge and experience that you always bring here to our committee. It makes a tremendous difference. And that's kind of where I want to start my questioning, and I'm going to go to Ms. Vega. And I know you do a lot of reports and analysis and position papers. How do you engage with your members in terms of the consultation? So when you bring forward something like a FTA Pacific Alliance, so that you gauge your members where they're at with this and where they can put their opportunities, concerns, etc., on the table. How do you do that? What is the process you take to?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'll try to keep it short. It's, as you know, we're the largest business association in the country, so it's not an easy or simple process. We have actually various ways through which we inform our policy positions. Annually, we have an annual general meeting where our different chambers of commerce across the country, they come together, they make recommendations on policy positions, and that's a very democratic process in a way. It goes through many different iterations and commentary, and at the end of that process, they're voted in, and that becomes our position on a topic for the next 3 years. So one of those positions that's actually in our books right now is to diversify trade. So this would fall under that bucket. But obviously, things don't happen under our timelines, and we have a number of committees within the membership that look at different aspects of policy issues. So I staff, for example, our Committee on International Affairs, and that specifically looks at trade agreements and bilateral economic relationships with various countries. So, for instance, Canada-China, Canada-Japan, negotiations with the EU, and this kind of consultation on Pacific Alliance will fall under that bucket. So we know it's a big committee, so we'll tend to go to those members whom we think have an interest or would have more relevant information, and we ask them, and we try to raise, in a way, our positions to a high enough level that brings together all the different views, because sometimes we can have quite divergent views. So our position really is to have as rich as possible a policy recommendation, for example.
Because you represent all sizes of businesses, small, medium, large, and all sectors for the most part, which sectors have said that they would realize the biggest opportunity with an FTA with the Pacific Alliance?
At the moment, we have food, agri-food production, agriculture, as you can see from my colleagues at the table, and services. That has been the biggest caucus, I would say, in favor.
And if some of your members raise concerns?
Surprisingly, no, and I tried to look. I did ask, and it was surprisingly no, no big comments against.
So, and this could be to any of the presenters. So we heard from the Canadian Labour Congress, and they're looking at making this a very progressive FTA. So bringing forward chapters on labor, environment, indigenous, etc. How do, and any of you can comment, how would you feel about those chapters? Do you think that would enhance this agreement?
Well, I can go first. In a way, we're trailblazing. It hasn't been done before. No one is yet an associate member of Pacific Alliance. So even there, you have a strategic advantage in that you can actually partake in how these things are done. I mean, the full members, they know that they have engaged, as you mentioned, in a very progressive conditions for their agreement. And I would point you to programs that we have already, kind of like the Nexus, for example, or the Trusted Traveler between the U.S. and Mexico. It doesn't mean, I think sometimes it can be misunderstood that it just means you're just going to open the floodgates. But there's mechanisms, and we have a fairly thorough immigration policy here in Canada. So I think it's a matter of looking at how these conversations evolve and what the conditions are. But it's definitely, I would say, in the modern economy, and when you're looking at industries like fintech or digital trade, you cannot look at trade anymore without thinking, how am I going to move data? How am I going to move people? So I think it's worth having a conversation.
Mr. Lavoie, that question, and it also in particular to labor, because we've heard some issues around and concerns with labor shortages when it comes to your sector, your industry.
Very short answers, please.
Yes. We have a progressive industry, especially in pork production, where we make sure that not only on the economic side, but also on the social side and the environmental side, we are on the edge. And we would welcome this kind of an agreement where it is progressive. We have to remember that we have 70% exports of our market. So opening some opportunities in the world is really important because it allows us to have a more stable market.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Well, this is basically, yes, in the principle, the idea, especially when you're touching the part of labor, which is a key component for growth of Canadian pork export as the labor issue in plants, in processing plants, and in farms. So this is very important. The only thing I would say about it is just we have to make sure, as I mentioned earlier, we have a window of opportunity to gain versus if we're not doing anything. So I think we have to make sure that if you're making it progressive, that you're not, adding too much time to the process.
Thank you. And we're going to go to the NDP now. Ms. Ramsey, you got the floor.
Thank you all for your presentations, and in particular, Mr. Lavoie, I really appreciate the specifics of what you brought us today. And one of the first question I really have, and it really does, Adriana, certainly you can weigh in, but I'm not sure if you've done this type of analysis. Of course, we're always looking for the benefits for Canadians, and that comes down to jobs in our communities. So I wonder if you've done any analysis on how many jobs you feel that the access to this alliance would create. I hear for the pork industry that it really is about Colombia versus Mexico and Chile and Peru potentially. But have you done any analysis on how many jobs you feel you could create in Canada with this agreement going forward and the quotas being presumably raised and tariffs lowered?
Well, on our side, the answer is no. I mean, we know what the larger TRQ are bringing in case of TPP, the value for our industry and the growth, the investment, everything that's bringing. And some plants are specifically geared toward the Japanese market. They do 100% Japan. So it's easy to see the link there of the jobs that are supported. In this case, we haven't, to be honest, we haven't done that analysis because it's markets that are covered from other FTAs. So
you have an analysis. Say, for instance, you raise if a quota is raised by 1,000 tons, how many jobs in Canada are tied to 1,000 tons? Access to another market. Do you have any type of analysis about that?
Well, it's what it does is it brings extra value to the whole value chain. It doesn't produce. There's no more pigs, being raised and all of that. So it really increased the value that supports investment. I don't have specific numbers for that. So.
was going to suggest it's not always about increasing jobs, it's maintaining the jobs that already exist and allowing producers a sense of comfort to reinvest in their facilities and take on new technologies to maintain competitive, but also to adapt to society's needs. In that aspect of it.
Yeah, there is always, though, like, a sector that unfortunately ends up losing jobs in some of the trade agreements that we have. So it's always about, to me, how will we increase Canadians working? And I know that you have a challenge with that in your field, certainly. So I'll ask Ms. Vega the same question.
Unfortunately, I don't have stats with me. We haven't gone at that level of depth in our analysis, but it's really about providing the conditions for those jobs to, like it's been mentioned, to preserve them or to grow them. And I'd be happy to look into it, consult our members, and get back to the committee.
And I want to go back to non-tariff barriers because I really do think that this is more significant than the tariffs and potentially even the quotas to you. So in the countries, maybe I'm making an assumption, but because we've had FTAs with these countries, I'm sure that we've been resolving these issues ongoing. But seeing that Colombia and Peru are really the markets where you see potential, what are the non-tariff barriers that exist there, and how do you see this agreement addressing those?
There's not, in the case of Peru, where you're shipping so little, you don't run into, major problems. It's limited volumes. We rarely hear back. And part of our job is also to work with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, with our members. If there is an issue at the border, this is what we're doing and supporting market access. And there's not a whole lot. In the case, this is more of a systemic access issue with Colombia, with the trichina recognition. They recognize it from the U.S., not for us. We think this is there's no reason for that. The herd status is not different in Canada. We're working with Agriculture Canada, with the CFIA, to resolve those issues. It's been a long time. We're increasing it on the priorities, but the context of an FTA gives you so much leverage to get things done. We've seen it for sometimes the deals at the highest level, the chilled pork access from the U.S. to China. All of these, there's a leverage when you come with an FTA to resolve those issues very quickly.
Other agreements, and when we studied the TPP, there was a lot of conversation about the committees that were going to be created there, and really where they could potentially go in the future to be more enforceable, to be able to bring particular cases. Is there something like that would exist in the Pacific Alliance Agreement?
Sorry, Ms. Ramsey, we're going to have to cut you off. We're not going to be able to get the answers on that. Have to leave it as a statement instead of a question because it's over 5 minutes. And we're going to, maybe you'll have a chance to, we'll get on another round there, but we're going to move over to Mr. Peterson for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, everyone, for being with us this morning. I have a few questions here that we want to get on. I want to, first, Ms. Vega, just talk to you about whether any of your members see opportunities for sort of less traditional markets for Canadians with the Pacific Alliance, and maybe some services agreements, some communications, some technology. Scotiabank, of course, is an example of a Canadian company that's doing well in some of these markets already. Are any of your members sort of looking at this as an opportunity to expand on those?
Well, I believe so. I understand that Scotiabank actually made a submission to the government just outlining the specifics of, the benefits that would be in this agreement for them. But definitely in the services space, it's all about rules of trade, and this is an uncharted territory. The trade and services agreement, for instance, at the WTO, it's stalled. CPTPP, of course, it's still in the running. But like I mentioned earlier, this is a race almost to achieving the highest gold standard. And I can tell you in Pacific Alliance, we are hearing from other countries, competitors that are observing this very closely because they care. They care about what standard you achieve when it comes to regulating moving data, moving people, storing data, what kind of regulations go attached to that agreement. Because in a way, you set the standard and you enshrine that in an agreement. So being part of this group, I can tell you, has implications way beyond just that region. So.
Right, and that's, I think, a good segue to sort of the next part of my question, which I hope everybody has a chance to add their input. This Pacific Alliance, I mean, we have free trade agreements with the countries already, but if we move forward, we'll be part of this block, this important trading block that some see and some say will be a good launching pad to a bigger market, the Asian market. Have you guys analyzed that? Do you have any thoughts on that potential favorable role that this being part of the bloc might play for Canada?
Certain Asian countries are observing Pacific Alliance, including China, Japan, and there's a huge interest in bringing Australia and New Zealand into the mix. So I think it tells you something that all this vibrant activities happening on the Pacific side. So I see it as an opportunity, but perhaps I'll give my colleagues to.
Absolutely. You know, Canada has some great negotiators out there. And also Canada brings a lot to the table when we enter into negotiations. So, you know, we were successful in completing the TPP and the CPTPP now. I apologize for that, but the pronunciation.
We're all getting used to it.
I say it 10 times in front of the mirror. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things where there's always spin-offs. And, you know, as Adriana mentioned earlier, the modernization of regulations and how trade functions is extremely important. You know, tariffs and non-trade barriers are part of it, but encompassing in written and I guess the rule of law regarding trade, that really what trade agreements are, helps set the standards globally. You know, and that Canada is a trading nation, and for us, we look at the opportunities that trade agreements do provide, frankly, individually. But you know, we also look at the bigger picture as you're outlining, and obviously with the growth that we see within the Asian regions and whatnot, developing economies, and frankly, the population. They will be needing, from our point of view, agricultural products that we're more than pleased to provide.
I think those free trade agreements are so important for the stability it brings to trade. That this is the most important thing, is have stable trade to any given market. And then it leads to better presence, like investment for companies, having an office in the country, having some investments. Like we have companies investing in plants in Mexico. Now, this is the kind of environment that kind of FTA is creating. I mean, Russia was one of our largest market a few years ago, and it disappeared overnight. And I know that I was trading at that time. I had to deal with, you know, all the messy situation that this created. But obviously, there's not a lot of Canadian investment in our industry there because the environment was still unstable. So if you can bring this to markets, if we can use that as a platform, then to have better access to key markets like that are not covered with TPP, like Philippines, China, all Asian markets that are growing, because we're doing our strategic plan right now, and really where we have to look at the growth for our product is Asia. This is really where the growth is happening. So if this can be used as a platform for better access to other Asian countries, I think this is a great gain. But stability is the key, because I really know that you know, the science in food trade sometimes is really political, and this is a very easy way around it, and we're dealing with that on a regular basis.
Thank you, sir. We got time for a couple more, I think, and we're going to move on to the Liberals for the second round. Madame Lapointe, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, bienvenue.
Thank you. Welcome. This is very interesting. Everything I've been hearing is quite interesting. You all spoke about the timeline and that the timing was very important. We have competitors that would like to replace us, if I understand things correctly. You both, Mr. Lavoie and Mrs. Vega, you spoke about the timeline. So according to you, what should be done? What should we do? What can we do with the time that we have?
Negotiations unfold, and like I said, being part of the Trailblazers is a good thing because you get to have a voice in how the rules are made, but also we don't exactly know what the process is going to look like. So I would say, as my colleagues have already mentioned, timing will be important, not just in terms of beating the competitors to it, but also in the sense that, like you mentioned, the conditions are right now, and accessibility is right now. But it's very difficult to actually put a hard deadline on these types of negotiations. And you're seeing it on NAFTA, for example. We set a deadline for December, and now there's a new one to March. These things are very complex. It depends on how deep you want to go in the negotiations, the willingness politically, and what other dynamics are in the mix. So I think it's very difficult to predict, but ideally something that can be done fairly quickly, considering that much of the legwork has been done with these countries individually. I can foresee this as a fairly short negotiation, hopefully.
Mais j'ai quand même d'autres questions.
I have other questions. Earlier, Mr. Roy, you said that there were 31,000 jobs in Canada with regards to pork production, 65,000 jobs that were linked to processing, and you didn't talk about direct and indirect jobs. The indirect jobs would be, for example, grain, transportation, all of this. Do you have any data? Well, on the data, indirect data, no, I don't have specific figures on this. I would have liked, for example, if you would like to talk about the question of value added, this is important with regards to producers. It's important to add value to our products, and this type of a trade can allow us to have more value added. For example, for Japan, the same pork is sold at a higher rate in Japan, and this can provide opportunities for certain markets, increase the amount of jobs, but value-added jobs, not only in the production, but also in processing. Okay, I very well understand value added depending on the price and what part of the pork. But are you selling? Well, what is the proportion of processed product prepared to be consumed versus refrigerated products? You seem to be saying that there were better opportunities to have chilled products with regards to the Pacific Alliance. So what is the proportion? Well, the proportion at the current time, if we look at, well, there's not a lot. Well, there are processed products such as ham, etc. But mainly, the Canadian product that is used. We're going to export frozen parts that will be processed. Now, when we talk about fresh product, it leaves Canada. It has a 55-day shelf life. It's sold directly on the Japanese market. I was in Japan and recently, and all the Costco's in Japan have Canadian pork. So we're 50% of the import market. So what this does is the same product, if it's not sold fresh in Japan, $1, $2 less a kilogram. So if we add this all up, it's a huge amount of difference. Yes, but you seem to be saying earlier that when we're talking that it wasn't, well, wait. It was Colombia and Peru, I think, where there were opportunities, and that most likely by opening up the markets that you would have more opportunities to sell. Yes. The U.S. right now are able to sell fresh products that will be directly put on a supermarket sold fresh in supermarkets, but we are limited. We can only sell frozen product that has to be frozen with supplementary costs for X number of time. Okay, so one quick question. When we talk about transportation and export capacity and infrastructure, is this a dilemma or is this an issue for you? Yes. Yes, there are some issues. For sure, there is the stability. And with regards to a trade dispute in the pork sector, this is important for us. What we have as a current issue is the speed to be able to fill the containers in the ports with the management of CNCP. Yes, the management of CNCP, well, it's very long, and you know there are truckers that don't want to go anymore, and so there are improvements, service improvements that have to be made. Thank you.
We got time for one more, and Mr. Hoback, you got the final hit there. Go ahead, sir.
Sure, and I don't know if Earl had a few questions, but I'll go through mine first if he has time. I was shocked. 50,000 containers a year, that's 140 containers a day. One could say you are bringing home the bacon by doing that, couldn't we? I'm just thinking, if you look at the economic activity that you've generated by getting that market access. I was actually in Tokyo a few weeks ago, and I actually sat down with 3 of our trade commissioners, and they actually complimented pork on how well you've done in gaining market access and gaining brand loyalty for Canadian pork. And I actually think the beef sector and a few other agri-food sectors could look at your example and learn from what you've done there with the trading houses there, and do the same thing in their sectors. Now, the other thing I thought was really interesting, they talked about these trading houses that are 100, 200, 300, 400 years old, and they're excited because they're going to get Canadian pork, Canadian beef at preferential access, and they can put that as ingredients in the stuff that they manufacture in Japan and ship to other Asian countries also. So we've got such a great springboard. And I look at the same scenario in the Pacific Alliance countries. When I look at, we get involved. In fact, we were involved. I remember being down with Prime Minister Harper in Calais when the Pacific Alliance was having a set of negotiations, and how Canada, even though we weren't directly involved, we were sitting around the fringe at that point in time and actually having a fair bit of input in what an agreement looked like that Canada could actually participate in. So I think we've done a lot of that work, like you said before. But what it does is it sets the rules, just like TPP does for Asia. It sets the rules for Central and South America. And what does that mean when you talk about, just the 3 or 4 countries you got market access? But what about Guatemala and El Salvador and Uruguay and Paraguay and places like that? Have you even looked at what the possibility of that flooding into those markets?
Yes, we have. And this is very easy. You look at what a free market, what free market conditions are doing. Guatemala, U.S. exports there are, 20 times ours. It's very easy to see. Like we're, on a daily basis, and the customers, the opportunities. So we're really, hands down on those opportunities. Central America, this is all an area where I think the U.S., for many reasons, is doing better than we are. And if one direction is to look closely at that region, would definitely be supportive of that. For your comments on Japan, well, thank you very much. We're working really hard, and it's based on the commitment of our members, and we've changed the strategy. I just want to explain something, that some of the programs that were supported by the government at the farm level, we've branded them in the verified Canadian pork, which is now the brand that we're promoting in Japan. So this is, the growing forward. We're doing our application for Growing Forward 3. This is a big part of we have growth access, but we're going to need growth and promotion. We're going to need funds to promote in Japan. And when you were talking earlier,
those guys,
on competitive advantage, this is one where the budget to promote meat in the U.S. is like 20 times ours. So, and this is something that we're going to come to, and I'm doing a more ambitious plan to support really like Canada branding.
I'm going to cut you off there because I think you need to have that conversation with him for sure. But I only get 5 minutes, and he's really tight for time. Ms. Vega in the Chamber of Commerce, of course, you must be excited, but you also must be. I guess you look at the concerns, and Colin talked about the tax changes in the U.S. and how it's going to impact our competitiveness in Canada and how we have to be sensitive to that. But I guess one of the ways to offset that is to get market access into regions that the U.S. doesn't have market access into. In fact, talking to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and groups like that, that's actually their biggest concern, is they're going to have almost economic boom in the U.S. and no place to ship it. And, so that's one thing I think it would be something you'd look at in a positive light here in Canada by having CITA, by having TPP, by having a strengthened agreement with the Pacific Alliance countries. Do you not see that at least providing some stability to the Canadian business sector?
Absolutely. I mean, it can't hurt, right? And these dynamics, it's almost a bit of a tension in, horizontally and vertically. And you're looking at CITA, for example. We know for sure that the U.S. business community was observing very closely because they got pretty close on their TTIP agreement. And now CPTPP, of course, it's one more where the American business community is concerned because they're saying, well, there goes our leading in our leadership role and first mover advantage. So I think absolutely that having that added advantage on our side, it helps. But as you said, there's the
Would it be fair to say, though, if we didn't have that advantage, that we would have a draining of Canadian businesses south of the border? Because if we didn't have market access and those types of advantages over the U.S., what would we have the advantage on? How would we compete?
I mean, I would agree with you to some degree. But I can tell you the biggest concern that foreign investors have when we talk to them is NAFTA. So I think that our relationship with the U.S., you can't detach that from how we operate in the world. You can't suddenly just detach how our supply chains work north and south of the border. So I think, yes, I agree with you. It's definitely something that we kind of have set aside on the list of great things that we can compete with. But at the same time, we have to be very mindful that our relationship with the United States is always going to be there and that NAFTA is a huge piece of that.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Holbach, and thank the witnesses for coming today. It's amazing how well we're doing as a country with some of the industries, and we're big players on the world scene. And keep up the good work, and we'll have a report in the upcoming months, and you'll be able to get a copy of that. That wraps up this morning. We're on time here, so there's another committee wanting to come in here. Tuesday, same time, and we're going to have a very busy Tuesday. We got 2 panels, so MPs try to be on time, and I'll get her going. And everybody have a good weekend. Thank you.